The Dragon Prince is an animated series on Netflix that I just watched and one that I liked a whole lot. It's a high fantasy action adventure show created by Aaron Ehasz, one of the writers of Avatar: The Last Airbender, one of the best animated shows to grace television in the past 2 decades, which also spawned one of the worst films in the past 2 decades, and is now getting a live action adaptation. And if you've heard anything about this show, then you probably already know that, since they slapped that tidbit everywhere. Welcome to marketing. The show is set in a world of magic and wonder, where war is on the verge of breaking out between the human and elf races after humans went and started using life-sucking dark magic, and then got reprimanded by the elves for it, and then the humans went and killed the Dragon King and his only egg, the titular Dragon Prince. Now the elves want revenge for that act, so they send a group of assassins to murder the human king Harrow, along with his biological heir, Prince Ezran. Amongst these assassins is a young elf girl named Rayla, who ends up befriending Ezran and his stepbrother Callum, after it's discovered that the Dragon Prince's egg was not destroyed by the humans, but was instead hidden away in Harrow's castle by his closest confidant and advisor, Varen, a man with his own agenda. The 3 kids then decide that the only way to stop this conflict between humans and elves once and for all is to take the Dragon Prince back to its mother and prove that the humans and elves can learn to coexist peacefully. I've actually been following this show for a while now, going back to when it was first announced, and like most people, my interest was initially piqued by the fact that one of the Last Airbender alumni was making it. That influence really shows through the Dragon Prince in several ways. At face value, you've got things like how there's an initial trio of main characters, with 2 of them being siblings, the third being a mystical outsider, and one of them being voiced by Jack DeSena. Then, of course, you've got the cute, weird critter that serves as the team's mascot. If I had to use a single word to describe the show, I would say potential. The show introduces several things and tidbits about the world and the societies that live within it, but not going super deep into each one. We see sprinklings of things like some of the elements of magic in action, or traces of the cultures that live within the world, but nothing terribly concrete yet. It's the sort of thing that feels like it could have a lot of payoff later, but it hasn't quite gotten there. A high fantasy world where humans and non-humans clash is also not exactly an original concept, but that doesn't stop the setting of the Dragon Prince from being intriguing and engaging, and it also doesn't hurt the story. They introduce the concept of there being a multitude of magical elements that govern the world, kind of like a certain other series, and at the end of the first season, we've only seen a handful of them in action. Combine that with some other races and cultures that were mentioned but not actually shown, and you've got the recipe for something exciting to look forward to in the future. And something else I really loved about this show was just the art direction, costumes, and weapon design. The Dragon Prince has a really gorgeous world and some really cool stuff in it. There were several weapons that got shown off, for example, that just made me go, ooh, I want that. Like how Rayla's swords are basically just oversized butterfly knives that can turn to hook swords, or how in one episode they meet a guy with the fantasy version of a 1000-degree knife. These things were awesome, and it made me want to see more stuff like this in the future. The design for the fancy races, at least the ones we've seen, were also really neat, particularly the Moonshadow elves. I like the fact that all of them have horns for some reason. I don't really know why, I just think it's cool. I just think it's a neat design. Lore-wise, it's probably because they're all about worshipping dragons or whatever, and I guess it makes them look a little bit more draconic, but I don't know. Horns on elves. That's neat. I also like the fact they wrote in a deaf character that only communicates through sign language, and honestly, she ended up being one of my favorite characters on the show. The character is not only a badass, but the fact that they have a disability is never commented on. There's no lost in translation comedy moments where characters have to look sideways at each other trying to figure out what she's saying. It's just treated as a normal aspect of her character, and overall, I thought it was handled with a lot of respect. The character did have an interpreter for people that don't understand sign, but sometimes the character would just be signing and there would be no one translating for her, subtitles or otherwise, yet we were still able to get the gist of what was going on. It was subtle, effective, and really cool. I really want to see more representation of characters like this handled in a similar way. Overall, I liked a lot of things about this show, but that doesn't mean it's perfect. For starters, the biggest point of contention with this show is definitely going to be the actual animation. The show is an all CGI cartoon, which is fine and it looks good art-wise, but the actual animation side of it can be off-putting. For some odd reason, the show runs at a lower frame rate in several scenes. According to a recent AMA on Reddit, this was a stylistic choice on the animator's part to mimic older cartoons and anime that had a lower frame rate, but it doesn't really work. There's a lot of movement that stutters with janky motions, and overall it's pretty distracting. The weird part is that this frame rate issue doesn't happen in most of the actual fight scenes, where characters are moving much faster and smoother, which makes you wonder why they don't just do it all the time. I remember seeing this style of animation in the early trailers for the show, and I'm worried now that it might have turned off a lot of people to the concept. After all, if it's an animated show, it's probably important that people can tolerate the animation. Am I right? The good news is that I got over it pretty fast. By the second or third episode, you just sort of learn to roll with it, and while it's still a little noticeable, it's not nearly as distracting. All the same, this is something I think they could stand to lose in the future, which is also something they mentioned in the AMA, that they'd be willing to dial it back if they get another season. The other main issue is the length. The show is only 9 episodes for its first season, and the actual quest for the main trio to run off with the Dragon Prince doesn't really get started until the 3rd. The good news is that the show doesn't try to rush itself in spite of that. The progression of the plot feels natural and not too fast-paced. But the bad news is that by the end of the first season's last episode, it still feels like there should be a little bit more coming in. Like, maybe there should be one more episode to set up the next season. Finally, I'm kind of on the fence with the main villain. For the most part, I think the character writing in this show is really good. There's some gray morality, and most of the villain characters, like the 2 Team Rocket siblings, are very endearing and likable. They're the type of people that you don't want to make bad decisions, but because they're following the bad guy who is their father, you know it's going to happen anyway. And it's intriguing to watch it unfold. That being said, the main villain himself is kind of all over the place. At the beginning of the show, he seems like he'll be a spin on the stereotypical evil chancellor vying for power archetype, with his genuine concern for the king in a brotherly love kind of way. But then by the 4th episode, he just goes straight into manipulative bastard territory, and it doesn't really show any of those redeeming qualities throughout the rest of the season. So what's the deal? Was he always a douchebag? Did the events at the beginning of the show tip him over the edge? Was he always a snake? It just happened so quickly that it's kind of jarring. But despite those minor complaints, the show's great so far. I'm hooked and eager to see where it goes. There's plenty of potential for it to grow and for the complaints that I addressed to be fixed. I really hope this show gets picked up for a second season, because with Voltron now ending soon, I could use another well-written action cartoon. If you're looking for a good action adventure show with an interesting world, story, and characters with awesome designs and art, check out The Dragon Prince on Netflix.